Now, I asked the nation's Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollands, about this worsening situation.
Well, it sounds like it's getting worse in certain parts of the country, but overall the trend has been downwards for youth crime, not just in Australia but internationally.
Well, that's obviously good news if there's an overall trend downwards, but I suppose there's not much comfort to those communities where they've got a real problem. We've talked this year about Alice Springs, Port Augusta, Laverton in the west, Townsville, Toowoomba. You're looking at this through a special project?
I am. So really in Australia, I think we are in a crisis when it comes to our management of youth justice generally. Even though the numbers have gone down over time, clearly there's sort of spikes in certain locations, and also I can see that governments are really struggling to know how to respond. And so I've called for submissions for what will be a report to the Australian Parliament eventually, looking at youth justice and child wellbeing reform, because really those things go together, and we really need to understand what we can be doing to really have in place the mechanisms that will keep youth crime low and keep the community safe.
Yeah, in the first instance, there's always a lot of focus on the law enforcement aspect, the policing of these issues, the need for perhaps more police, but also there's a focus of late on the age of criminal responsibility and raising that. How could raising that possibly improve the situation when sometimes you have 12 and 13-year-olds who know exactly what they're doing, committing egregious crimes?
Well, look, I think what we see, we've really got to look internationally at what's happening. Unfortunately, in Australia, we're quite parochial when it comes to this issue, and it has been, frankly, neglected for a long time. Internationally, where they have raised the age, and across the developed countries, most of them have, that the world has not fallen in. And in fact, what they're doing is actually, instead of spending a lot of money locking up kids and therefore making them better criminals, frankly, that's what the evidence shows, that the younger you lock up a child, the more likely they are going to go on to commit more crimes. They're investing in diversionary programs early on to ensure that kids go back to school. You know, kids should be at school, not in jail, to ensure that they're getting help for their disabilities. These kids have very high rates of neurological problems. They have learning problems, impulse control problems, information processing problems, and mental health disorders. And they're not getting help for those problems. And so things get out of whack and they end up, on the streets, out of school, on the streets and doing crime. We've got to address that. We've also got to address the poverty, the disadvantage, the complex needs that we know that these kids in Australia, but also everywhere in the world, these kids come from those very complex backgrounds, often suffering child maltreatment and domestic and family violence in their homes.
We'll come back to those issues in a moment, but here in Australia where these issues are playing out, the ACT has just increased the age of criminal responsibility to 14 is where that's going to go there. Isn't this a problem though when you've got youth crime waves in Alice Springs or Townsville and the like? The police don't have to use the criminal justice system. They don't have to try and have kids incarcerated. But where they have a 12-year-old who does exhibit hardened criminal behaviour, surely taking that option away from them could be a problem.
Look, there's a whole lot of issues to do with whether those kids understand what they're doing. And that's where we've also got to look at the science, Chris, that we now know that the adolescent brain really is not fully developed until the early 20s. So progressively they're understanding more. But, I think unless we bite the bullet and raise the age of criminal responsibility, as other countries have done, there's not going to be that impetus to find those diversionary programs to better support these kids who have disabilities. I think it's very distressing to me to be seeing the youth justice system, the criminal justice system, as our only response to children with disabilities, right? We should be actually helping these kids and supporting them to get on the right track, to stay at school, supporting their families so that they're not doing crime. And all of us would benefit from that.
Look, there's no doubt about that. Of course, we've got to deal with the crime in the first instance. If people are being robbed or their businesses being ransacked, you've got to deal with that. But the real issue here really is family dysfunction, isn't it? These are children who are not getting the parental support and the parental oversight that they need. And it's very old-fashioned, I know, but often there's only one parent and very often not a father figure or indeed a male figure of prominence or authority in the lives of these kids. And that's somehow we have to find ways to improve that situation.
Chris, I agree that these kids are coming from families that are very troubled. Often they have complex needs, but I think that what we're not really looking at, and I've worked in child and family wellbeing my whole career, we have not spent enough time looking at how to fix those basic public service systems of health, mental health, education and social services, including housing, to be able to support families to get the help they need. So, when you talk to these kids and their families, they cannot get the help they need for drug and alcohol problems, for those sorts of issues that adults have. And so the well-being of the adults is going to have an impact on the well-being of the kids. It's pretty much a mess. Child wellbeing is not a national policy in this country, Chris, and it needs to be. And youth justice is just one example of where we're failing these kids.
Hell of a problem. Thanks for talking it through with us, Anne. I appreciate it.